this podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. For me, it's a thrill whenever there's someone I know that I'm speaking to, especially these days. I've done so many episodes with people I know virtually, and I get to know them online. And then a rare occasion happens where I speak to somebody who I actually know in real life. And that's you, Nada, on the right. We'll get to Sandra later, but let's focus on Nada first. I think it's bittersweet because the last time I saw you was in the same building that I stay in whenever I'm in Beirut. And I was just speaking to the landlord of that apartment, and he was explaining just how much damage happened a few months ago. And I learned that you also left that apartment. And it's odd to go back to Beirut and not see you either in the elevator or walking around the building area. I'll have to get used to that because I'm going back to that building. But I think a lot of things have changed, especially the last year, but in particular since the blasts in August. And for me, it's a thrill to get to explore something that is, I think, quite meaningful. It's something that I'm not very smart with. I did several donations-themed episodes, and I think this is the first one that focuses exclusively on children and, in a sense, education, but more broadly, maybe the mental well-being of children going to school. And it's an honor to get to explore this with you. And before anything, I'll just say it up front. The initiative you guys have started is called Let's Play. And its goal is to raise enough money to repair 3 playgrounds. And it's something that's urgently needed. And we're going to get into this. But before jumping into Let's Play and all of that, Sandra, it's the first time I meet you. And Nada, I know a bit, but you, I don't know anything about you. So maybe we can start with you, and then we'll sort of get back to Nada. What is this really about in terms of, let's say, 4 or 5 months after the blast? Why do you see this urgent right now? And is there enough time to actually do something which is quite bold, getting 3 schools ready once COVID restrictions ease? And maybe just your own personal ambition with this project. And if I understood right, like Nada, you're an architect and you have sort of the background in architecture. So if we could start with you, just a general understanding of what this is about, and maybe your own story and your own reasons of why you're participating in this.
Sure. So Nada and I go way back. We used to be at university together, and about more than 5 years now, we started the company together in Beirut. And so we work on a lot of projects together. We really work well together and so on. And like everyone else, the world kind of stopped for us on August 4. We both live at Ashrafi. Our office is quite close to Ashrafi. And in the beginning, we were devastated. We were trying to figure out ways to help out and so on. But it was an emergency, and what we were doing was really working on whatever the ground needed at that moment.
Right.
Even more than a month ago, we met up and we were a bit frustrated because we felt that we could do more, and what we were good at is finding design initiatives that are not just responding to the current situation on the ground, that look at the broader projects and broader ideas and so on. But we also needed to find small interventions that we could do, and hopefully those would completely grow out of proportion by raising awareness and raising funds and so on. So we started looking at schools because everyone's looking at the residential quarters, and that's where we had started. And we started looking at schools and moving around from school to school, and what we found was horrific. I mean, we'd walk into a school, yes, the windows and the doors are damaged and the furniture, but then they'd start telling us like even the projector's broken, like there's no infrastructure for the school. And I mean, we looked at a few, nearly 40 schools, and we noticed that, okay, this is really out of our scope. We don't know where to start. So we thought we're going to start with playgrounds. Playgrounds have I mean, in our opinion, they have a really big effect on the students who are going to come back and come back to something that has changed. Like there is no way you're going to remove all the scars on the building physically. And most people that go to these schools already live in the area. So we thought playgrounds would be a really small initiative that can grow, that can raise awareness for people in the country and outside to start to look at these institutions that all our kids go to and spend half the day there and sometimes more. And that's how we started. And we ran it through a few people that we met in the schools, and they were a bit tired in the beginning. They were saying like a lot of people have visited the schools. We keep on being promised that something is going to happen. We're going to get some help, and nothing's happening. And so we were really practical. We said, listen, I mean, it's me, Nada, and our third partner, Ep.231. We're like, listen, we're architects. We practice here. We have budgets. We know what we can do. We can do something really small, and hopefully that will grow. And we showed them a few sketches and images and possibilities, and they got really excited, and that made us happier to be part of this. And now we have students on board and so on.
I'll just interrupt for a brief moment. When I think it was meant to be the four of us speaking together. And in my mind, I just assumed because of COVID, everyone is in a different location and we're going to figure it out. And then for me, it's actually quite fun that, we're doing this in person. You're in person. But had Etienne been with you, this would have been a hard episode, the three on one sofa. So I think in a way, Etienne can enjoy this from a distance.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that this is something that's not an NGO per se, that this is really you guys taking initiative on your own. And I'm curious, is there, before we get into maybe the intention really, and how you chose these three schools out of, I think it's over 40, if I'm not mistaken. It was something like 44, if I read that correctly.
Yes.
Right. So before we go down that path, just, did you sense that there is a gap in terms of focusing on schools? And is there anything that's happening aside from these kinds of initiatives? In other words, are there NGOs addressing these concerns that are not necessarily classroom focused, they're more extension? Or is this something that's really citizen-led throughout the board, that there's no one really taking action at the organizational level, not the individual, but really like where there's a channel and there's a way to sort of do this in a larger scale? I'm just curious why this is being done by individuals, which is a noble goal, but it's not NGO driven.
Mainly, this is how it's happening at all levels, because we all know that the government is barely present in all this reconstruction or restoration work that's happening. So it's all about initiatives. It's either NGOs or personal initiatives. And this is the case in most of the schools. So the schools are not any different. And so mainly what's happening is like the school is there, the administration is present at school. We need to keep in mind that now that schools do not look like an urgent case, mainly because of COVID and the fact that students are actually not at school currently. So it's not such a quick response. So
right.
residential is being the main response. The schools are having a bit of a delay, mainly, or like they're having the chance of getting a bit of time, mainly because the students are not back yet, but they will have to be back soon. What's happening mainly is they're receiving a lot of NGOs and a lot of private initiatives, and I don't think I'm not aware of any big fund by the government or even or the Ministry of Education or any. Yeah, it's mainly about someone fixing a small part here or small part there, and I don't think they're really able to deal. Some of the schools, like we know one of the 3 schools, they assessed the damages and they say that it's over $1 million as a cost. So,
sorry, and that's one school?
That's one school.
They're really, some of them are really big schools. So one of the 3 schools actually has 1,080 students.
Wow.
So they're not like, so it's really like 44 schools really probably, I mean, everyone in the area, not only in Ashrafi, in the larger area come to these schools. So it's
so, let's, before we jump into because I like that you've made it very easy for somebody willing to donate. You kind of it's a step-by-step process of how you kind of reach certain conclusions and figures. So before we get into the particular schools and the numbers, is it simply that this was not addressed because this was not considered an emergency issue, that it's now sort of something that you can discuss without it interfering in the immediate aftermath? Is that, I mean, in other words, do you sense that there's no wider cause here because it's not considered urgent? Am I getting that right?
I mean, yes, to a certain degree. I mean, if you talk to NGOs on the ground one-on-one and you tell them, like, let's work on playgrounds and so on, I mean, of course, they're really excited, but I mean, funds are limited. There are different priorities. Also, I mean, NGOs are not ready to tackle with the devastation that we have.
Right.
Most of them didn't have any architects or any engineers. Whenever there's a structural issue, instead of making something faster, what happens is it completely slows down. So I mean, there is a lot of work on the ground, and I mean, we all have to do our little part somewhere.
Yeah, but I think at some point, like in a few months, when students will have to go to school, they will really face a major issue. So now their focus is to have a house, a home. Like some people do not have a place to stay. This is certainly the most urgent part. But schools are, as I said, because of COVID, they kind of got a certain delay, which is somehow a good it allowed them to take a bit of time, but like very soon it will not be the case, and soon kids will have to go back to school, and some of them really do not have classrooms or do not have any enclosed space, any playgrounds. So there are major issues.
Maybe the reason I was pushing on this is because it speaks volumes that it's left to individuals coming up with these ideas and their crowdfunding strategies on their own. So all the more impressive. And I think it's an ambitious goal, and it seems like you guys have done your work. So I'm going to include the PDF file that was provided in the episode so people can actually see what you're doing and what you want to do. And I hope I got this right. It's 3 schools in the Ashrafi zone, that's sort of the most devastated neighborhoods that were impacted by the blasts, and that you're looking to raise 40,000 euros collectively. So the total amount is 40,000 euro. And did I understand this right, that there's an estimated $15,000 per school? That's the estimate.
And this is why the total is like $45,000, which we kind of showed in euros. So it's somehow 40,000 euros. So this is for 3 schools, 3 playgrounds in total.
Right.
And hopefully if we get more funds, this is our aim, to get more funds and to be able to really intervene in the 44 schools. Maybe.
So what's our pilot project? And there are 1 playground per school. Each school has 4 to 5 playgrounds. So we're just trying to
right. Yeah. So in other words, if this succeeds, then you can replicate the model for the 44 schools.
Exactly.
Yeah, hopefully.
So these 44 are primarily in that area? I mean,
Yeah.
Ashrafi and the surroundings.
Yeah.
Okay, so right.
Yeah.
So with your permission, let's go into the why you chose these three particular schools. And I see them in front of me. There's the Armenian Evangelical School, which is in Jaitewi. There's the École Notre Dame, which I think is in Cécine, up in Cécine.
Yes.
And then the third one is also in Cécine, École my French is so bad. It's École Secondaire de la Charité. I don't know how to say that. It'll come up on the screen without me.
Next to the hospital, somehow close to Sodek. Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, close.
So how did you narrow down these three to start with? Just curious. What was is there a reason why these three are maybe the first three for the pilot? I'm just why these stood out to you?
We've got this question a lot. We mainly looked at damage and how devastated the schools are. I mean, it's hard. It was really hard to pick, to be honest. Some of them are just as bad. We tried to pick from 3 different neighborhoods, but I mean, there's 5 or 6 different neighborhoods.
Also, we're trying to have like different types of mainly architecturally, but also in terms of I would say like the Armenian school is somehow it's not a public school, it's not even a private school. Somehow it's like a school with a low tuition. It's not a very expensive school somehow.
Right.
The same applies to the one next to Cécine. We're trying to mainly, these are not public schools. So far, we did not tackle public schools. These are private schools, but however, they are more like somehow subsidized. You're not paying a big tuition, so we're mainly targeting these schools. Our aim is also to work with public schools, but there we will have to deal with all the bureaucracy of the government and the Ministry of Education. So we said maybe we start with these ones, and then we'll have a portfolio, we have pilot projects, and we can go to the public authorities and show them what we're doing, and that might help us deal with them and go through the process.
So that's interesting. They're neither private nor public. In a way, they're depending on charity from individuals. Yeah. That includes even reconstruction, if I understood that right. So this is really, I see. Okay. Well, let's go into maybe the elements that you listed, because for me, this is brand new terrain. I know nothing about this. I know nothing about playgrounds. I know very little about what schools need after devastation. And I think you've made it very easy for an amateur to understand. And you list, there's three priorities. And the first is the play elements, which are big toys and jumping elements. So Sandra, maybe you could sort of walk us through that element.
What we're trying to do is is to create, really oversized elements. So like a really big cone, a really big hand, just really big recognizable forms. And what we want to experiment with is to actually see how these forms somehow create space. So they're very simple. And what we're trying to do also is to find these simple forms that are oversized that we make with craftsmen in Lebanon, in hopes that also the school gets funding because of this playground, they can continue to add these elements. So they create different zones, and they work well with many elements. You can continue to add these elements to make the playground larger and so on.
I see. So the oversized decision is just, I'm curious because it's displayed that way as well in your pamphlet.
It has a bit of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, I see.
Inspiration in there.
I see. So is it a deliberate sort of escape from what happened? Is that sort of part of it that you're trying to offer a bit of?
We're thinking that those kids, they left school. I don't know, a few months ago, mainly because of COVID. So they're not actually in school, right? And they're studying online, and this is a whole new experience for them. And then while they were doing all this individual online schooling, they were the explosion happened. So they also know, in parallel of that they live the explosion, they also know that their school is affected. So there are many factors. So you have kind of traumatized kids in a way. There are kids who are not really, they already lost a bit of their relation with the school because of COVID.
Right.
So we were thinking of how they would go back to school and what would be, so instead of going into their previous school, they're actually going to a school with a lot of scars and damages.
Mm.
What we want to do is actually create one positive experience there. So something new, something colorful, something a bit mysterious that they will have to discover and be happy to enjoy, to play with. So this is why we thought of doing these big interventions. So they look like toys, but like they're big toys that are interactive. You can jump there. You can, I don't know, swing. Maybe we will have to figure out that.
I mean,
not slides and like the common new playground you would think.
Yeah, and the reason I'm curious is because the photos that were provided doesn't look like any playground I played in when I was a kid. So it must be, it's a thrill to come back to a school after all of this and see these kind of exaggerated toys. May I ask something like this element before getting to the other two? Is this volunteer driven? In other words, is there any cost in terms of setting this up, or is this student? So who are the volunteers that will actually participate in putting that together?
So basically,
about 10 students.
Yeah.
So there's 10 students willing to do this.
Yeah. And some new graduates. We both teach at LAU and AUB, so some of them
and
NTU. So a lot of students actually saw the GoFundMe going around, and they just asked to be part of this.
So this is really volunteer driven. The whole, even installing.
I have no idea how much like students are really doing a lot of work, especially now students and fresh graduates in architecture and in engineering. They do not really have a lot of work opportunities, and they saw this happening, and they are all very active, and they're doing a great job.
Yeah.
So like today, one of our students is like, okay, we were discussing the idea of painting and planting as part of the project, and maybe including some trees and all of that. And so one of the students, okay, are we going to plant ourselves? I'm like, okay, maybe if you like to do that, you can do it. You can even paint. Yeah, she wants it. So they're like really very
hands-on.
Yeah, they want to really be part of. Yeah.
But that shows just exactly what's at stake, because if there's no NGO willing to do this, and if there's no donor, there's no fund, this is really just the goodwill of common people. Yeah. And I think that's quite astounding, because it's not, I admire that sort of the ability to do this completely as a volunteer. I think that's magical, actually. And the second element, which is the sort of the ground painting, these ground colors, and that to me is familiar, but the way I think you want to do it is sort of a very dramatic version of what I'm used to, just in terms of crayons and maybe charcoal colors. Can we get into that? Is that part of art therapy? Is there something there in terms of letting people express themselves through colors, or is that am I getting that wrong? That it's more just to, in a way, colorize the school? Is there a bigger goal there?
Well, I think it all goes to this same idea of creating happy places where kids will go and have a new surprise, a new feeling there. Also, many students do not love their schools. I think not everyone really likes school. Yeah. So it would be nice to go back after all this time and all what they went through into something that's really fun, and like I think it will remain part of their memory eventually, to remember a nice playground at school, to remember like these colors. So personally, I don't have these very colorful memories from my my school. So maybe this is also part of our own therapy to really make it more fun for other kids.
I mean, this is not maybe the right parallel example, but I remember when Siufi or Fesur, these neighborhoods, and Karim Zaytun in Beirut, this is going back maybe 15 years ago, when really overnight, the walls of these homes were painted in different colors. And they've done this in different places, Bebet Bene as well in Tripoli, just these neighborhoods that are rather bleak in color, stale, and just sort of cement, that suddenly they sort of reemerge in these very beautiful ways. And you have all types of colors living side by side. So when I saw that kind of exaggerated form of color in a playground, it reminded me of that healing where you see something that you don't associate with as a pleasant view, and suddenly it becomes very pretty. That to me, it resonated, and I think children would get a kick out of that, seeing a place they don't really look forward to going back to suddenly appealing.
I think there are different scales. So we're really just looking at the ground of the playground. And the places that you were talking about, they're kind of like a whole. It somehow hides the misery.
Yeah. So the goal is
a bit debatable because like there are different points of view about whether maybe we should not go into that topic, but like the idea of hiding not a very maybe somehow covering a view. This is not exactly what we want to do. It's more about also it's not only about colors. So colors can become, let's say, connections or spaces. Even one of the nuns in one of the schools was telling us maybe you can do it in a way that also allow students to sit in different zones. So for COVID, also it can be a part of the distance, the safe distance between students. So it's not only about colors; it's also about maybe a kind of games or I don't know, something to play or to gather kids or to separate them. So it can be a tool in how they use the space also.
May I ask, did you need a lot of consultation with the schools about what exactly was needed from their side? Or is this really your own creation? You approach them with these ideas? Because I'm curious if there's any potential friction or if there's any collaboration. How did you reach that sort of, is this something you wanted to do? Or did the school sort of insist on that? And then you went with it?
So for now, it's, I mean, the images you see are images we've collected and put together and collaged together. We've run them by the schools, but we haven't, so what we're doing now, we're in the stage of actually drawing them to scale in each of the playgrounds.
Oh, I see.
Definitely. I mean, they're quite involved, especially in informing us, because the students are not there for us to understand really how they use the space. So they're actually informing us about how they use the space, where do kids hang out more, what types of games do they play, so that we also don't kind of completely change the space, but instead add on.
So these are your ideas, and they're kind of there's a give and take process, I'm assuming, at the end. Okay, that's really interesting. You know, before we get to the third one, I think it's quite nice that you're actually using urban planning in real life. That this is not just theoretical urban planning. I kind of picked up on this. That I hope I remember this right. Neda, you studied urban planning?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, both of you. Oh, Sandra, you did urban planning as well. Okay, I remember. Etienne, I think, was also involved in urban planning to a point. And yeah, so, okay, I'm glad. 3 urban planners that are able to take what they've spent years studying and probably spent a lot on studying and taking it into real life. And that's very important. I often think of that degree as a lofty goal that kind of ends up in PowerPoint slides. And then here you have sort of a real cause in front of you, and it's your own creation. So I admire that. And then
please. And the urban planners.
Right. So you're able to kind of use both skills in that sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Together.
Right.
Because like someone was asking me, why do you care about playgrounds? Actually, this was my brother. He's like, why playgrounds? I'm like, what's the link between architecture and playgrounds? So I had to explain that basically it's playgrounds might be the first public space that any kid would use or experience. So if we think about urban planning, it's mainly one of the major aspects of urban planning is creating public spaces. So there are spaces where people would meet and interact and meet other people who are similar or different and share ideas and discuss. So this is why public spaces are very important. And for a student, for a kid at maybe 3 year old, this might be the first public space for them because this is where they meet their first friends, or they start to make their own friends and enemies and all of that. So it's one of the first public spaces that each one of us.
I'm going to guess. You tell me if I'm wrong. That playgrounds are one of the few available public spaces. Period.
Yeah.
I mean,
in Lebanon, yeah, of course.
I mean, students in a way are lucky. Children are in a way lucky that they can use playgrounds, but in general, we don't have public space beyond that. So in other words, there are no community parks where kids could play, and you have sort of, in a way, it comes down to initiatives like this. The third element to me was the most interesting ones, the shading canopies. I've never seen anything like this. I don't even know you have to tell me what exactly you're doing here, because I think you'll encourage children to never leave school if you give them what you're trying to do. So this is not just swings. This is not sort of breeze in the air. This is all out. Tell me more about the canopies and what you're trying to do here, and how can I get my own canopy later?
So what we were trying to, I mean, we looked at it as a complete intervention in the playgrounds, and we thought about the playground and these big objects that you can move around or push or jump on and so on. Mm-hmm. And then the relationship to the sky. And I think that came out a bit from visiting the schools. I mean, you go into a school, you enter a classroom, and then there's the corridors and there's the windows and so on, and they're quite big, but they're also quite busy indoor spaces. And then there's always that moment, even when you're visiting the school at our age, there was that moment that we experienced again of like, okay, we're outdoors, and you always look up first. And we thought it would be really nice to also play with this idea of how much you see and how much you don't see with all of these colors and so on. So that was kind of the idea of the three elements.
But it's
covered a certain area, so this is the area where kids will gather and meet other kids. So when it's all totally open, you're not really creating zones for kids to sit together and to meet other kids. They will end up maybe sitting in the classrooms or any indoor space if it's very sunny or if it's raining, for example. So creating these canopies also somehow define gathering spaces, places where you would meet your friends, where you would meet new people. So it's also part of that. And the three elements might not be totally separate. So one idea would be to have the ground, let's say the color of the grounds might create a certain structure, and the toys might be part of the structure, and then the canopy, so they can also be connected. So it might be like one intervention where you can, I don't know, jump or have a break or under a certain canopy. So it's all part of it can be one big intervention in the school, something that you will recognize. It's part of the identity of the school at some point.
May I ask, are you using what's available? In other words, do these schools already have playgrounds and you're kind of assuming control over those playgrounds, or is this separate from what the school has?
I'm not sure I understand, but
they already have the playgrounds. Yeah.
No, I guess I didn't. So sorry, I didn't ask it correctly. I didn't ask it correctly. Sorry, I meant are the playgrounds damaged to the point that they can't be used, and that you're recreating them, or do they already have their playgrounds and these are sort of additions to what they have?
Well, I mean, both. A lot of the schools have playgrounds on the roof, and these are completely damaged because these were
right. Yeah.
So there's nothing left. Any toys they had are completely damaged. They're like the big plastic toys. I mean, that's it. They're a bit gray, the playgrounds we visited.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is to create, I mean, we're not taking over all the playgrounds and we're not taking over all of the playground that we're taking. We're trying to create this like little capsule that we put in the playground, and there's going to still be a lot of free zones around.
Right. Okay.
Without our intervention. But there's this interruption where you can come in and it feels like suddenly there's a completely different atmosphere, but also when you're playing around it, you see it, and it's like something new, really like a capsule put in. To change the mood and be surprising on different scales and from different people.
I see. So it really is just, it's a portion of the playground, and that sort of can be replicated in any playground. Okay, that's interesting. I understood that there's an urgency related to this, that you want to finish this, or at least have what you can finish prior to the reopening post-COVID. So what is the time frame in terms of trying to raise the money necessary? And beyond that, do you anticipate just perpetual donations if this is to be replicated, or is there going to be eventually, are you eager to have a donor sort of involved? Because I'm curious how this could be replicated if these three succeed with the budget, how you sort of anticipate potentially reaching all 44 schools.
Yeah. So basically we have 1 month now, like at least we dedicated till the end of this year.
Okay.
We hope that by the end of this year, we will be able to fund the 3 projects that we mentioned. And we're already doing the work ourselves, like with the students. We're already surveying, designing, drawing, and pricing. We're doing all these jobs. So if by the end of the year we have the money, of course, we will be able to implement very quickly. So
the $45,000 is by the end of this year. The next, okay. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, and then if this goes well, what we will need to do is basically maybe starting a new fund in order to finance the other schools. Otherwise, we might maybe create a certain or maybe a website. It doesn't have to be this way, but basically we need funds. We need funds in all cases. So now we need them for 3 schools, and then eventually, this is what we will need. So we might, we hope to get big funds, but we also believe in small ones. So everyone can contribute with like even €5. We believe that if we can have more of these small funds, we will really be able to do eventually more playgrounds.
And I mean, we're very open. Like we've been approached already by some amazing NGOs on the ground who are willing to also help fund us. One of them is Beirut.
Yes, it's funny you mentioned that. They repaired my landlord's windows in the building that Nada you were living in. Yeah. So, and they did it, I think, very, very quickly and efficiently too.
Yeah, they're very efficient. They're very active. So we presented our project, and they're like, okay, go ahead. We will fund your first playground. Yep. So already we have 1 playground funded.
Oh, that's great.
But we're hoping to get the fund for the other 2, and eventually more funds also.
I will emphasize the donations, and anyone listening, now watching, it's in the details box to this episode. And I really hope you meet your goal by the end of the year. And I also hope that this can be replicated without too much hassle, because it's a very ambitious goal to hit all 44 schools. And I think it's a noble goal as well. And I wish you the best of success in that. Thank you for walking me through something that kind of takes me back to my own childhood. And I think I kind of, in a way, selfishly, I wish I was a kid going back to one of these schools with these playgrounds, because I think they're quite appealing for any child wanting to relax and calm down after a very difficult stretch. So wish you guys the best, and thank you, Nada. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. And a friendly reminder to help support this podcast, by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Rani Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.